When a serial killer is finally brought to justice, it makes news headlines around the world. But I believe that beyond those headlines lie many more victims that we don't know about, and I want to uncover the extent of these killers' shocking crimes. Robert Black is one of the most evil, predatory paedophiles that this country has ever seen, but his 30-year offending period led to him being convicted of only 4 child murders. I'm convinced this is just the tip of the iceberg, and if I'm right, he could be guilty of more crimes than Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, making him the most prolific child killer in British history. There were 651 murders in England and Wales. What percentage got cleared up? I'm Professor of Criminology, and I've spent a lifetime working with serious violent offenders. I've written something like 15 books about serial killers and violent crime. And I've been teaching my students this theory, this idea that serial killers are responsible for many more murders than those murders that they get convicted of having committed. What age group do you think is most likely to be murdered in England and Wales? This is the first time I'll be able to put some of that theory into practice by going out on the road and meeting people that might be able to direct me so as to demonstrate that that theory is real, that serial killers are responsible for many more crimes than they're currently being banged up for. I want to use new crime theories to see if I can find links in other cases to the predatory paedophile, Robert Black. Despite being given 5 life sentences for the abduction and murder of children throughout the UK, I'm convinced there are more cases that merit further investigation. By analysing his unique offending behaviour, I want to examine the possible links between Black and a number of unsolved crimes. If my theory is correct, it will make him the most prolific child murderer that this country has ever seen. The scale of Black's child killing spree is truly terrifying. For 30 years, he evaded capture by every authority in Britain because his murders covered the UK. Black has been convicted of crimes that date back to the abduction, sexual assault and murder of Jennifer Cardy in Northern Ireland in 1981. He received 3 further life sentences for the abduction and murders of 11-year-old Susan Maxwell, who disappeared in 1982, 5-year-old Caroline Hogg from Portobello in Scotland in 1983, and 10-year-old Sarah Harper from Leeds in 1986. Each child's body was discovered miles from home and had suffered a horrific death. To understand Robert Black as a criminal, I need to get a sense of his crimes. I want to start my journey by looking at the case that would bring his killing spree to an end. We're on our way to Stow, which is in the border between Scotland and England. This case is really important to understand because it's the case that's going to bring Robert Black to justice. The case itself reveals quite a lot about Black's MO, and I think that's very important to build up a picture of how he would snatch children. The similarities in killers' crimes are known as their modus operandi, or mode of operation. In modern crime theory, it's one of the most vital tools we can use to tell us everything about how a killer committed their crimes. More importantly, it's a criminal's signature, providing clues as to whether other crimes have been committed by the same person. I've studied the Robert Black case for years, and a crucial part of his MO was the speed at which he snatched children and bundled them into his van. But every serial killer eventually makes a mistake, and Black's happened here, in a tiny village in Scotland. I've come to meet former DCI Andrew Watt, who was the senior police officer in charge of the case that ended Black's murderous career. He was the only police officer that Black ever opened up to. Andrew, we're in Stow on the borders between Scotland and England. What happened here in 1990?
That Saturday afternoon, there was a little girl walking on the footpath here, and a gentleman across the way, he noticed a van. The van stopped beside the little girl, and the next thing was the gentleman saw the little girl's legs and feet disappear and headed off up this road northwards.
Black had quickly abducted the 6-year-old girl and parked in a lay-by further up the road. Once there, she was bound, gagged, and he subjected her to a terrifying sexual assault. However, this time the abduction had been witnessed and the police were called. As Black returned along the same road to make his escape, his van was recognized and he was stopped. The child was found in the back of his van, hidden inside a sleeping bag. She was minutes from suffocation. As a child victim of a serious sexual assault, her real name has never been revealed, and she is referred to as Mandy Wilson. Andrew, there was an extraordinary end to this particular story about finding the little girl, wasn't there?
Yes, it was really quite amazing. The policeman who stopped the van was the little girl's father, and he found his own daughter trussed up in the sleeping bag and rescued her.
The story of Mandy Wilson reveals a huge amount to me as a professor of criminology. Being here and walking through the crime scene gives me a fascinating insight into the mind of a devious serial killer and the nature of his horrific crimes. This information will be essential if I'm to link Black to any other cold cases. Well, really, what we've learned about Robert Black from the Mandy Wilson case is just how well practiced this behavior of abduction is. Black is able to abduct a child quickly. There are no witnesses. As luck would have it, in this case, there was a witness, which is why Black is ultimately brought to justice. Knowledge of the local roads, little towns, he sees an opportunity, he scouts around for a suitable victim, and then bang, that child is gone. The arrest of Robert Black kick-started one of the biggest investigations into unsolved abductions ever seen in the UK. Black would eventually get 5 life sentences for his catalogue of horrific offences against children.
Today convicted of his 4th murder, but suspected of many more.
But Andrew believes that could well be just the tip of the iceberg and had an important piece of information he wanted to show to me.
That was the list of the children that I thought he could well have abducted and be responsible for their disappearance. I think that Black's was offending from the 1960s onwards, and the way his offending developed, I don't think there was any time when he was not offending.
Now, are there any particular cases that you think that Black's MO?
There was a case in Norfolk in the late 1970s, a little girl called Fab. I was always interested in that. I thought similarities were significant. His method of operating wasn't just similar, it was unique.
And what about other cases from the 70s that you felt had echoes of Black's MO?
There was a girl in Devon and Cornwall, Janette Tate. I felt that he was responsible for that particular one.
Since Black's capture in 1990, Andrew has compiled a list of unsolved cases that he believes warrant further investigation. You know, here's somebody who's interviewed Black. Here's somebody who made a connection with Black so as to get further information out of him. I also really was impressed by the fact that Andrew talked about how unique Black's MO was. And most important of all, meeting Andrew has convinced me that Black is responsible for other murders. And he's given me a list of 7 cases that I really should be focusing further on. So with my list, I want to examine these crimes more closely. Unfortunately for me, Black left one other crucial clue. He revealed the workings of his depraved mind to one other man. And what he said was captured on tape.
Tate arms, found the sticky plaster, put the plaster over her mouth, and then I just slung in the corner.
Robert Black is currently serving multiple life sentences for the abduction, violent sexual assault and murder of young girls across the UK, and I'm on a mission to investigate whether he might be connected to other unsolved cold cases. I want to use all the tools at my disposal to gain an insight into the mind of a killer, and Robert Black made the mistake of revealing himself on tape.
Trying to understand myself. Keep asking myself, why? I got this fascination or weakness or whatever I want to call it.
Ray Wire was one of the world's leading experts on sex crime, a groundbreaking therapist who was pioneering the treatment of sex offenders. During an appeal by Black against his conviction, Wire would record nearly 40 hours of interviews with him in prison, which can now provide me with a rare insight into the mind of one of the world's most dangerous paedophiles. Ray died in 2008, so I've come to meet Tim Tate, who collaborated on a book with Ray about his sessions with Black.
Listening to the tapes was extraordinary, harrowing. So little is understood about predatory paedophiles, or certainly was then, because, frankly, they're a rare-ish breed.
After his initial interview with Andrew Watt, he refused to comment on his crimes, but during the interviews with Ray Wire, he began to open up.
Tied her hands, found the sticky plaster, put the plaster over her mouth, and now I just slung it in the corner.
He was prepared to talk about everything that had happened in the past, but was very cautious about anything which could get him convicted of something else.
Black seemed to hint at further crimes that no one had ever associated with him. You were mentioning that Black was quite careful about some of the things that he was prepared to reveal.
Oh, absolutely. His general way of talking about this was in a sort of almost parallel. If this had happened, this is how it would have happened.
Where were these two girls? So up near Carlisle someplace. One was 6, one was 9, I think.
Well, he described cases in Scotland, not the one for which he was convicted, which were much earlier, plainly much earlier.
Booked about 10. She went into the side streets and the back streets. Like. I followed and I was out of the van. And she screamed and ran.
Then Black was charged with the killings of Harper, Hogg and Maxwell. And at that point, all the sessions stopped, everything was cut off, and Ray wasn't able to go and see him again. I listened to those for about 6 months of my life, and I don't think I'll ever forget some of them.
Black was apparently providing cryptic clues to other unnamed cases in which he may have been involved, as he discussed with Ray Wire the roots of his paedophilia. Robert Black was born in 1947 to an unmarried factory worker in Falkirk, who left him in the care of the local child welfare department. He was placed with elderly adoptive parents who lived in a small Highland town. However, beneath the tranquil surface, a darker story was being played out, as discovered during the notorious interviews.
I remember one Christmas I didn't get no Christmas presents because I'd been bad. I can't remember what I'd done, you know, but she says Santa Claus isn't coming this year to you. And he didn't.
While still at school, he was suspected of having abused a neighbour's baby, but the incident was ignored. At age 10, his adoptive parents died and Black was taken into care, listed as boy number 28 in the Red House care home in Musselburgh. For 5 years, he shared an attic bedroom with other orphaned boys, and for 3 of these years, he would suffer systematic sexual abuse by an adult member of staff, who is now dead.
Other boys are being abused by the same man? Not at the same time, no. His system was, from what I've been able to make out since, was that, and what he told me at the time was, like when the boy was leaving, he'd asked him who he thought he should go for next.
From the care home, Black moved to Glasgow. It was here, aged 16, that he would commit a crime that would set the pattern for all of his future sexual offences. He abducted and assaulted a 7-year-old girl.
I was in the park in Greenock at the swings, and all the other kids had gone except for the one little girl. And I asked her if she wanted to see, let's see, a kitten. I knew where there was kittens. She came with me. And so we were going into it was an air raid shelter. She said it was dark. She wanted to get out again. She started to cry. I think I clapped my hand over her mouth, held her down on the ground with my hand around her throat, holding her down. And she must have gone unconscious anyway. Went out, left her. And you didn't know that she was alive or dead?
This violent assault would be the first criminal offence recorded against Black. However, he only received an admonishment and deferred sentence. A psychiatric report concluded that the incident was isolated and that he needed no treatment. It would be a further 27 years before Black would finally be captured for abducting Mandy Wilson in Stow. Realising that the man that they had in custody could be a serial predatory paedophile, forces nationwide began to reinvestigate every case of unsolved child abduction from the previous 30 years. Immediately, 3 more cases of murdered girls came under the spotlight. 11-year-old Susan Maxwell, who disappeared in 1982. 5-year-old Caroline Hogg, who went missing from Portobello in Scotland in 1983. And 10-year-old Sarah Harper, who disappeared in Leeds in 1986. All were found hundreds of miles from home. All had been wearing similar clothes, including short white ankle socks, and all had been brutally murdered. As the police investigated further, they made a major breakthrough. Discovering Black worked as a driver for a nationwide poster delivery company, they learned where and when he had travelled all over Britain. Petrol receipts placed him near all of the areas from where the girls went missing at precisely the time they disappeared. But the police still needed more evidence if they were going to get their man. The police would be able to build up quite a picture about Black's MO through the abduction of Mandy Wilson. But we've got to remember that Mandy was a young child at the time, and therefore the kinds of information she'd be able to supply to the police would be limited. And therefore, if the police really wanted to build up a picture of Black's MO and something called similar fact evidence, which would allow them to tie him into other murder investigations, then they really needed a more credible witness. And that's why I've come to Nottingham to interview somebody who survived an attempted abduction by Black in April 1988. Similar fact evidence is the legal term used when the prosecution submits to a court the details of previous crimes committed by the defendant to show that they share uniquely related elements. Theresa Thornhill's evidence would prove the turning point in the case. Theresa, can you take me back to April 24th, 1988? What happened on that day?
It was a Sunday morning. I decided to go out with my friends. We went to Woollerton Park. Then later that evening, we decided to come back, and I thought that I'd take the shortcut to my mum's. And at that time, I seen a white van, which I didn't take much notice of. Bloke got out and he shouted, "Oi!" Then next minute before I knew, the guy came over to me, grabbed me, squeezed me, carried me to the van, put his hand over my mouth and tried to shove me in the van. I was screaming, I was shouting "Mum," I was shouting "Help." All I was thinking was, somebody please hear me. And luckily, my friend heard me and he jumped over a gate, and because Andrew shouted to him, he panicked.
How long did that incident last? Can you put a timeline on it?
It felt like forever, you know. I was struggling with me being small and him being so big. But then luckily I bit his forearm and knocked his glasses off.
How did Black react when you started to fight back?
I think his reaction, he was a bit shocked because he probably thought that I was younger than I looked. Something made me fight back and made me just wake up and think, you know, I've got to get out of this. I can't let him take me, because, you know, I won't see my family again.
But you were 15 at the time.
I was 15.
Can you describe to me what you were wearing on that day?
I was wearing mint sandals, white ankle socks, a pink skirt and a pink blouse.
I think you're incredibly brave. I know this must bring back dreadful memories, but it's your courage that actually allows you to survive.
I am lucky to get away, but I feel guilty. They're not here. Those girls' lives have been taken away, and I'm here still. Their parents can't say goodnight to their children and hello and have you had a good day, where I can.
This is the spot that Black tried to abduct Theresa from back in April 1988. Her story is very important in building up a picture of Black's MO, which is ultimately why Theresa would have to give evidence at Newcastle Crown Court. In 1994, Black was given a further 3 life sentences for the murders of Caroline Hogg, Sarah Harper and Susan Maxwell. All bore his unique hallmarks: young girls abducted off the street and forced into his van. Modern criminological theory has spent a lot of time researching how serial killers operate. Professor Craig Jackson believes their occupational choice is the most important factor in how they carry out their crimes.
Driving is very appealing for serial murderers. Being able to have the freedom of the open road increases the size of the hunting grounds in their hunt for victims. It also increases the potential for the number of victims they may be able to get close to. Driving for a living increases the likelihood of having a good alibi. A driver could be anywhere at any time. Also, being able to use a deposition site that could be many hundreds of miles away from an abduction site makes it much harder for investigators to investigate that crime effectively. Research we've done recently, looking at convicted serial killers in the United Kingdom from 1908 onwards, the biggest occupational group by far was driving. The main advantage of driving for serial murderers is that the van and the truck are almost invisible. We see vans and trucks countless times on our roads, but how many of us could reliably say the number of vans we saw in one day? For a serial offender, a van is almost like the perfect Trojan horse. It allows him to get up close to the victim. It allows them to get in and out of their hunting grounds without being noticed.
My investigation must now focus on cases where the victim could have been snatched and quickly driven away. And that takes me back to the first name on my list as I attempt to connect Robert Black to one of Britain's longest-running missing persons mysteries. I'm attempting to find evidential links between convicted serial killer Robert Black and any of 7 unsolved cold cases on a list supplied by a retired former senior detective. The earliest case on the list that bears similarities to Black's known crimes took place in 1969. 13-year-old April Fabb disappeared from a quiet country lane in Norfolk. To this day, no trace of her has ever been found. These are some of the hallmarks of Robert Black's MO. However, this crime took place 7 years before Black started crisscrossing the UK as a delivery driver. So far, this single fact had been enough to cast doubt on his involvement. But my hunch is that the case would be worth reinvestigating. I've managed to uncover some police intelligence, a document which isn't in the public domain, written about Robert Black in July 1990. Now, there are some really good pieces of evidence here because I've always known that Robert Black passed his driving test in 1976. But in this document, on page 4, it tells me that Black, prior to 1976, so before he passes his driving test, owned several vehicles. Well, you know, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because that means the road network, the sense of him being geographically mobile, predates passing his driving test. Well, where was he driving to? Could he have been driving to Norfolk? In 1969, April Fabb goes missing. So are we going to be able to place Robert Black in Norfolk in 1969? Because that then opens up the April Fab investigation. April Fab's disappearance is one of the longest-running missing persons cases in the UK. I've come to meet Maurice Morson, who was the former head of Norfolk Constabulary CID. He's written a book about the investigation and still remains determined to solve the case. So, Maurice, could you explain to me some of the geography of the April Fab case?
Well, April lived at the council houses just over to the left there, and she left home at just after 2 p.m. She cycled down this road. The donkey field was her first port of call because as she arrived at this field, 2 of her friends were there playing with the donkey. So she cycled along here. She left shortly after 2 o'clock. She cycled along here. Just here, she was seen by a Land Rover driver coming in this direction. Shortly on the left-hand side, here, her cycle was found.
Maurice, could you run me through some of the times?
Pillowbox Corner in the distance. She was seen there definitely at 2:06 p.m. Then the cycle was seen over this bank that we are approaching, 2:15. So you're talking about a 5-minute capsule.
Nobody heard a scream, nobody saw any unusual vehicles?
And strangely enough, there were picnickers not far away, and they never heard anything.
Maurice, that MO is very similar to the MO that Robert Black used when he abducted Jennifer Cardy in Ireland. Do you think this could have been the work of Robert Black?
Well, it's almost identical to the modus operandi of Robert Black, but there's no reason for Robert Black to have come to Norfolk. There's no evidence that he ever did come to Norfolk.
But of course, he would be driving by that stage. We know that he didn't pass his driving test till 76, but we know he did drive.
He drove vehicles before he passed his test. But we come back to the fact that there is no reason for him to come to Norfolk that we know of.
You've studied this case, you've written about this case. This is one of Norfolk's great unsolved murders. Who do you think did it?
Well, it's the Mary Celeste of Norfolk. It's not officially a murder, of course. It's a missing person, statistically. I don't know who did it. There are many theories, but opinions don't count. It's evidence, and we haven't got the evidence.
Everything on paper pointed to April's abduction as being a Robert Black case. She was cycling a bicycle, she was away from home, we're in a very secluded area. And it was so similar in terms of the abduction of Jennifer Cardy. The timeline that we're talking about here is so incredibly narrow. That's a unique form of MO. I also thought it was interesting that the bike was placed in view, which did suggest this was someone experimenting with the MO, someone developing their MO. But you know, you can only go as far as the evidence will take you, and there is no evidence to place Robert Black in Metton. With little evidence to link Black to Norfolk, I'm afraid I can't take the investigation on this case any further. To push forward, I reanalyse the Ray wiretapes, and it's Black's chilling description of another cold case on Andrew Watt's list that really sets alarm bells ringing. It's this case I'm now going to concentrate on, as I believe that the detail Black volunteers amounts to a virtual confession.
There was that paper girl went missing.
Tate?
Yeah, that was her name. She disappeared. She never turned up. I suppose I was thinking, how did he do it?
And how did you think he did it?
Well, they found her bike, didn't they?
Yeah.
She obviously either persuaded her to get off her bike or grabbed her off the bike, one of the two. Got her into a vehicle and took her away.
What is really, really interesting is he cannot personalise. He is finding it absolutely difficult to use Janette Tate's name. He's ashamed of what he has done to Janette Tate. It's that inability to say her name that is the little girl that he abducted and then murdered. In relation to the list that I got from Andrew Watt, we have Robert Black talking about Janette Tate. it means that I want to concentrate far more carefully on the Janette Tate case. The disappearance of 13-year-old Janette Tate took place in 1978, 9 years after April Fabb went missing. This crime is also unsolved, and like April, Janette's body has never been found. I'm returning to the scene of the crime years after it took place to see if even now I can uncover any clues or similar patterns that might connect Robert Black to this crime. We're in Aylesbury in Devon, which is the little village that Janette Tate was abducted from in 1978. And the first thing that strikes me is how similar Aylesbury is to Stow in the Borders where Mandy Wilson was abducted. You know, that's the village just beyond my shoulder. It's not very large. And so I suppose the first thing I should say as a criminologist, it's not likely to have been a local who abducted Janette Tate. Villages this size, they give up their secrets very quickly. So the person who did this had to have a reason to come here. Was he delivering? Was he moving on just to Exeter Airport, which is just further in that direction beyond the village? Did he know some place where he could park up a van, a lay-by, where he could observe children? Or did he just encounter Janette by accident on that day? On the day that she disappeared in 1978, schoolgirl Janette was delivering newspapers on her bicycle in the country lanes in sight of and close by her home. Bearing striking similarities to the April Fabb case, her disappearance took place during a very short window of opportunity when she was out of sight, and the only evidence marking her disappearance at the scene was the discovery of her discarded bicycle surrounded by scattered newspapers. Her father, John, agreed to speak to me about the dreadful day that he last saw his daughter. What do you remember, John, of the day that Janette went missing?
Well, we came down and looked around here. I got on top of the hedge and shouted her name. I wasn't in a wheelchair then, you know. And very quickly I decided to go back to the village to see if she was in the house. And she wasn't, and she hadn't been there.
Two of her friends had spoken to Janette, and the gap between them seeing Janette and speaking to her and then discovering her bicycle lying here was, what, seconds, minutes?
Minutes. It wasn't very long at all. I'm sorry, it's a sad thing, that bit of it.
The police were on the scene very quickly. What were you aware of them doing?
They searched around here, so did a lot of the public. I drove everywhere, all around the lanes, miles and miles looking for her, and couldn't find anything, you know.
When did you fear something serious had happened?
I think as I was driving around, because going through my head was, oh, that's such and such a time, that's so many miles he could be away, or they could be away with her, you know.
Of course, you and I can hear cars driving past, so they may have been searching in this specific area, but Aylesbury links up to quite a few of the road networks, doesn't it?
Because it's not far from the motorway here.
With Aylesbury's close proximity to the motorway and the disappearance bearing hallmarks of Black's MO, I feel that this case warrants much more investigation. Black has always been a potential suspect, but strong evidence to connect him has never been found. To establish a potential criminological connection, I sought the opinion of Professor Craig Jackson, who's produced some startling evidence relating to Black's movements at the time. Geographical profiling is the investigation of where crimes occur to try and predict where the offender could be based. It was used most famously by police trying to apprehend Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. Craig, you put up a map. Why have you done that?
So on this map, the first click there shows the route that Black would take on the northern route.
And so when you're saying the northern route, when he's working as a delivery driver for PDS?
That's right. The next click shows you the route he would take on the east coast over to Norwich and back. The next one shows us the southwest and the south coast route, and the final one shows us the Midlands run, sometimes with need to go over to Belfast.
And can you plot on that map where the murders and abductions took place?
Well, firstly, of course, in 1981 we had Jennifer Cardy. The second case, of course, is Suzanne Maxwell in 1982, and she was deposited down in the northwest corner of the Midlands Triangle. The next case, of course, was Caroline Hogg, who was taken from Portobello. And then the final murder, of course, was Sarah Harper in Leeds. In addition to that, there were two other abductions. He attempted to abduct Theresa Thornhill in Nottingham in '88, and later on, of course, in 1990, he attempted to abduct Mandy Wilson when he was caught.
So, Craig, that implies there are two distinct areas that there is no activity, no black activity in this Norwich, East Anglia area. And nor does there seem to be any activity in the South Coast run, which would take him as far west as Plymouth.
In 1969, there was an abduction of a young girl, April Fabb, but also later on, in 1978, you can see on the southwest route, Janette Tate was taken. What we'd have to add, of course, is that April Fabb was taken in 1969. That was a number of years before he began working for the company. We can't see a reason why he would be in that area of the country when Fabb was taken, so we would have to remove April Fabb from the map.
So that gives us a particular abduction and likely murder, that of Janette Tate, that I should concentrate on.
The profiling evidence suggests to me that I'd be happy to say there's an 80 to 85% certainty that he was involved in her abduction.
For me, the profiling evidence against Black seems compelling, but without either a confession or eyewitness account, I can understand why the police have not been able to directly connect Black. But I'm a criminologist, not a policeman, and so I'm interested in different types of detail that could be of relevance to the case. Did anybody ever come forward with Black's name or identify Black as being in the area?
Yeah, we did have that a bit. And there was one chap came forward that knew he used to visit a particular kitchen on the side of the road type thing.
Locally?
Yeah. And he used to go to the same place every time he was in the area to get a bacon butty.
So there is an identification that Black used to regularly get bacon sandwiches at a kind of truck stop close to Aylesbury.
Yep.
And you passed that information on?
Yep, we gave it to the police.
And what happened?
I don't know. That was the last I heard of it when I handed it on.
To me, this sighting of Black is a revelation, which really could be of use to the police, as I believe that access and opportunity are the two most important factors that a serial killer considers. Combined with the fact that Janette's disappearance happened almost exactly on the southern route that Black drove for his deliveries, the information I've discovered becomes increasingly compelling. After reanalyzing the known crime scenes of serial killer Robert Black, I feel that there are significant revelations which suggest a link worthy of further investigation into the unsolved abduction of 13-year-old Janette Tate in 1978. And Janette's is not the only cold case which can be linked to Black. Despite being behind bars, he's still making headlines. In December 2011, Robert Black was found guilty of the abduction, sexual assault and murder of Jennifer Cardy in Northern Ireland, a crime committed years ago, although he is currently appealing against that conviction. The fact that he was convicted of yet another murder so recently supports my argument that other cold cases need to be looked at again. You know, in terms of all journeys, they have to end somewhere. And I think for me, one of the best places that I can come back to in terms of ending my journey is just presenting some of my evidence to my students. You know, at the end of the day, I teach, and I teach some of the brightest young minds in criminology in the country. Thanks very much for giving up your time, and I'd like to discuss today with you the case of Robert Black. Immediate thoughts in relation to the cold cases of Janette Tate and April Fabb. What are your views?
There are quite distinct similarities between the two, but the concerns for me would be the timeliness.
There were no witnesses. It was sudden, it was swift, but I cannot find a way of placing him in Norfolk.
Is he likely
who do a similar crime using a different vehicle.
Good point. I'm going to be presenting this evidence to my master's students who work as detectives. I'm presenting this evidence to some of my brightest PhD students who study serial killing as a phenomenon.
But the case of April Fab appears to be spontaneous and not disorganised, the way he disposed of the bike.
I feel that I've gathered information in relation to victim selection, MO, signature, that just makes sense to me in relation to what it is that I'm trying to argue. What about Janette Tate?
Janette Tate, I think, is easier to place as a Robert Black victim.
Why is that?
She's got all the key characteristics.
And we can place them in Exeter around that time. At the end of this session with my students, I want to be in a position of either being able to conclude definitively or to have been given ideas that I need to also check before I'm able to make that definitive conclusion. I've presented to you what I know. I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many of you think that Robert Black was responsible for the abduction of April Fab? One. One, only one? So how many of you think it's still worthy of further investigation? Ooh, that is quite interesting, all 9 of you. What about Janette Tate? How many of you have I convinced that Robert Black abducted Janette Tate? All of you. No doubts. Thank you. The opinion of my students on the evidential links uncovered suggests to me a strong argument for re-investigating the case of Janette Tate and for not closing the April Fab case. I mean, I was bowled over that all of them, every single one, bought into the theory of Black's responsibility for the murder of Janette Tate. I was just surprised by their encouragement of me to think again about April Fab. And if I'm honest, I suppose I had started to rule Black out of the April Fab case. I just want to digest some of these ideas. I'm going to conclude, having thought about these things further, and conclude, therefore, where the evidence is going to take me. Like most serial killers, Robert Black has never admitted to the full extent of his crimes, but my journey has revealed a lot of new information to me. Firstly, many police officers involved in the case against Black were convinced that he had committed more crimes, and one even compiled a list for me of victims that, in his view, Black could be connected to. I also learned that Black's MO was so specific, even described as unique, that it contributed to his conviction for the murders of the 4 young girls. Visiting Norfolk, I discovered a case that bore striking similarities, but I couldn't be certain that Black would have been in that area so long ago. However, the Janette Tate case in Devon also indicated a strikingly similar MO, and when coupled with testimony remembered by her father and the latest modern crime theory, I believe that all of this merits further investigation. You know, at the end of this journey, one thing shouts out that Robert Black abducted and murdered Janette Tate. Even the SIO involved in the 3 murder cases said that Black's MO wasn't just unusual, it was unique. And we see that MO in relation to Janette Tate. We know that Robert Black drove a route that brought him to Exeter and to Plymouth and beyond. We know that witnesses would later come forward and say they saw him eating here or he was at Exeter Airport. So, you know, for me, this is all I can conclude. If similar fact evidence reopened the Jennifer Cardy case in Northern Ireland, that same similar fact evidence is here in this case, and that's good enough for me. We should be reopening this case.